Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. In this, the second part of a two-part episode, I sit down once again with Seth Cotlar from Willamette University to talk about the history of far-right activity in the Pacific Northwest.
This isn't the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day, bigger your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin.
Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire banking system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
That's actually fascinating. You bring up the Army of God and Operation Rescue and George Tiller. We actually had a relative of George Tiller's on the program about a year and a half ago, a woman named Amanda Rogers, who is very well up on that history because she kind of grew up in the middle of it. And we talked a little bit about the what it was like to be related to somebody who was on that list, because a lot of them were on that list at that point of just the Army of God had targets, and they were going to go after and in some cases kill anybody who was in their mind facilitating abortions.
Right.
And we aren't that far away from this. We aren't that far historically away from any of this stuff. So it's that era that you look back and you think, oh, wow, it's amazing that all that violence happened. But it's like, we're starting to pick up some of those old awful habits again here. This is getting bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the way that people justify and metabolize the need for this kind of violence, right? And this is where all that dehumanizing rhetoric that people like Jack Posobiec use, or, when Donald Trump refers to people as vermin, living in our country, that's the sort of rhetoric that gives people permission to.
Right. And this is why a guy like Jack Posobiec is relevant as much as I wish he wasn't, is because he writes a book, talking about the idea that we need to kill anybody who advocates for these ideas. But then he's going on all of these various foreign trips. He's going on these summit meetings. He's like traveling with Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense's group, to things like this summit that Trump just had with Putin in Alaska.
Right.
Like, obviously the guy is getting listened to at high levels. Same thing with Laura Loomer now apparently having, hiring and firing power over the White House in terms of their decisions.
Yeah.
So it'd be really nice to be able to just completely ignore these people as being, just a bunch of kooks, but they're being listened to and being taken seriously by people at high levels. So you kind of have to have some idea of what these people are all about and they're doing.
One of Loomer and Posobiec kind of got themselves on the radar in part by invading the performance of
Julius Caesar, Shakespeare in the Park.
Exactly, right. And that was like late 2016. It was after the election.
Towards the end of 2016.
Right. And so they were like, this Loomer, Posobiec, and everybody was like, who are these weirdos? Who are these like kind of, And now, now they're advising the president, and they have millions of followers. And
Posobiec shows up in Seattle because some guy who used to live in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle bought an old statue of Vladimir Lenin from some town, I think it was in Czechoslovakia, who was getting rid of it when they, got done being communist, and they threw it on a scrap heap somewhere. And this guy found it and brought it in and put it on a piece of property that he owned in Fremont. Right. And so, of course, it's always been this like magnet for protests. Posobiec and like 5 of his friends are down there in early 2017 with signs talking about how awful it is that the city of Seattle did this. And it's like, no, first off, the city of Seattle didn't do this. Right. This is one guy who owned that piece of property. You don't like it, take it up with him. You're big on property rights? Well, here you go. You guys have that argument. Right. But he, used these incredibly like just dumb, in a lot of cases, media stunts. And the next thing you know, this guy is on the national radar. He's getting a lot of people who should know better taking him seriously and listening to his ideas.
Yeah.
And speaking of, really bad ideas coming up at the national level, you mentioned something, just today that we're recording this, that they're putting out fundraising emails, of course. Donald Trump's always putting out a fundraising email of one kind or another. But today's fundraising email is a little dark in that he's referencing you can only call it sort of a federal law enforcement takeover of Washington, D.C. at this point. He is now asking people as a clickbait fundraising strategy, should Trump come and take control and stop crime near your house? And you mentioned that he's creating this permission structure for federal law enforcement, taking charge of all local law enforcement in every locality in the country, creating a permission structure for that. And you're already starting to see that in, not just places like DC and LA, but you're seeing it in some of the raids that have happened in Chicago, some of the raids that have even happened in Seattle. And they've got almost everybody looking over their shoulder for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Every time you see 3 or 4 police vehicles and somebody pulled over on the side of the road, that happened to me a couple times over the weekend. You look at them and you're like, is that ICE? Is that an ICE raid?
Right.
Is that what's going on? Why are there all these guys in vests pulling these people over? That's kind of not good.
Yeah.
But you find yourself sort of thinking, where did this start? The idea that we've got a law enforcement in this country that in a lot of cases seems to be very much ripe for somebody like him at the national level to come in and say, this is how we're doing it now. I mean, we criticize local mayors for not being able to stop their police departments from cooperating with ICE or with DHS. And I find myself thinking, can they? Does somebody like a Karen Bass actually have the power to stop the LAPD from doing this? I mean, she can't do much with the LA Sheriff's Department because that guy's elected and he has billions of dollars of budget a year to spend on this. But when did we get to a point where the local police were so detached from like local control almost? I know that's a large question, but that's what I find myself seeing more and more these days, is that the mayors can't do anything about this.
Right. Yeah, I'm less familiar with the kind of history of policing, and I imagine it's probably different depending on where you're talking about, right? That it's like a state level or even county level thing.
Okay, so say Portland, where you had at least a couple of the Portland Police Bureau, definitely during 2020 and the protests, George Floyd uprising, where you had these police officers at the PPB working with members of the Proud Boys and coordinating back and forth where things were going to be. And a couple of officers got themselves nailed for this, and it became like this huge scandal. But how, I guess that's what I'm just curious about. How did we get to this point where we've gone from like the county sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in the country, the posse comitatus stuff, to Donald Trump is the highest law enforcement officer in the country? Because that's where it really seems like we are now with some of these guys.
Right.
They were all constitutional sheriffs, but now constitutional means whatever Donald Trump says.
Right. I mean, I don't know if this is exactly what you're thinking about, but I mean, to me, a lot of it is rooted in this idea that is pretty important to folks on the far right, which is that these laws and these rights are not historical or geographically located. They are universal and they come from God.
Right.
So this is the justification that a constitutional sheriff might give, right? It's like, well, if the government tells me to enforce this gun law, I'm not going to do it, because if I do it, I would be breaking this higher law, right? That comes from God. And you can't ask me to do that, right? And so that kind of dogmatic view of like what is right and what is wrong, that is completely disconnected from the democratic process and the complexity of a diverse modern society, is what then legitimates and justifies these acts of just defying whatever it is that the people of a particular locality might want. So to bring this down to the level of like federalism, like in Oregon, right? The question of like, do federal immigration laws, can localities and states say that our law enforcement agents are not responsible for the enforcement of federal immigration law? Can they do that? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you interpret federalism. Like, can you or can't you? Well, this is just a matter of like whether we determine what's in the state's purview and what is in the federal government's purview. So basically what the Trump administration is doing now is flipping on its head all of the rationales for the use of federal power to defend the civil rights of Black people in the South in the 60s, for example. Right.
Right.
So, like,
So almost running the whole thing back because they've said in some cases, guys like, Charlie Kirk and Jack Posobiec have said outright that their goal is to get rid of the Civil Rights Act.
right,
They would like to, repeal that somehow.
right,
So the idea that federal mandates could be enforced by local police seems to be something that they would definitely like to get rid of unless it's their guy that's making those mandates. At
right,
which point, great, load
right.
them up.
Which is typical, right? When we do it, it's okay.
Mhm.
If the other people do it, it's not okay. Yeah. So the idea being that, like, there should be just one law and it's the same everywhere, is something that would go completely against what we historically would have thought of as American conservatism, which was all about
Right.
local control and small government and suspicion of a strong federal government. But now that they're in charge of the federal government, they're
Yeah.
like, you know, so much for states' rights or local control, right? You can have local control and states' rights as long as you just do whatever it is we want you to
As
do.
long as those states are doing what we think they should be doing.
Right.
If
And
they're not,
so,
then we got to send the troops in.
right. Otherwise, we have to send the troops in. And, so they invoke, so there's like a Republican activist here in Salem who's on our school board who basically was like, hey, people are complaining about what Trump is doing, but look, this is what the Republicans did during Reconstruction in the 60s. And I don't see people complaining about that. Right. So he's basically equating sending in troops to stop the Klan from murdering Black people in the South to sending masked agents to invade homes and schools to round up
Yeah.
people who have committed no crime other than being in the country, right, without documentation. So he just takes those two things and says, like, well, you
These are the
liberals
same.
love it
These are the
whenever
same.
right, whenever they were doing that, but now all of a sudden, when we want to, quote, protect communities from the threat of
Mhm.
undocumented people, you're opposed to it. Um, and so he's tapping into something. I mean, it's completely disingenuous and a ridiculous use of history, but he is tapping into a kind of ambiguity that's
Right.
just built into our system in terms of the nature of federalism. And, the Civil War is the moment when that federalism basically kind of broke down, right?
Yeah.
And slavery persisted because there was this kind of like agreement on the part of the federal government, right, not to touch it, not to do anything about
Right. Right.
it.
The only reason this stayed in place as long as it did was because it was this miserable compromise that they had come to, and
Right,
it's that or the country falls apart, and everybody kind of went along with it for those reasons. But eventually, it got to the point where it was untenable, and this just is going to have to get dealt with. It's going
right,
to have to get addressed at some point here.
right. And I think the Trump administration perhaps sort of sees itself as, I mean, so they've invented this crisis, right? The
Right.
crisis of the invasion, supposedly, of America. And like, look, man, tough measures, big federal power needs to be used.
Yeah.
And we have a history of using big federal power to solve problems like Jim Crow, right? We did that. And so here is another big federal problem.
This is the new Jim Crow.
It's right. Only it's like using federal government to do racism versus using federal government to try to undo racism.
Right. Let's
I would
bring in
argue a different
refugees from places that have been discriminated against because of their race, like white South African farmers.
right, precisely.
The same thing.
Right,
Damn. It's like funhouse mirror version of the last like 50, 60 years
right,
that we're looking at now. And it's every day
right.
gets a little crazier, it seems like.
And and I think it is a funhouse mirror, but there's also a consistency to it. If you recognize that for these folks, they really do believe, many of them, that white Christian Americans are more
Oh, yeah.
authentically American, right?
Hmm.
And and now the question is, what do you do to make that real? Is the next question, right? Like, how far are you willing to go? How much power are you actually willing to use to do that, to create that reality? And people fall along a continuum on that.
Right.
And I think basically what the Trump administration is doing is they're constantly pushing the boundaries to see what their supporters will accept. Right?
One big long shit test. to some
Yes.
extent. Like, are we going to get pushed back on this? No. Okay, we're going to keep doing it.
And what they found is that basically they've created a Republican Party that will provide almost zero resistance to anything.
Hmm.
And so they just keep pushing it. They're just continuing to push it because they recognize that within their own coalition, there are very few people willing. And this is why the capitulation of these law firms in DC, the capitulation of
Yeah, I just
universities,
saw something about that too.
right? The wealthy corporate folks, Bezos, whatever, all those people, like all of these kind of potential like speed bumps or
Hmm.
guardrails in this authoritarian push have just collapsed before them. And so they're
Yeah.
going to keep pushing.
Yeah, and it has, and it's happened really, really fast. You've got, these law firms that are now doing free law work for the president and his associates because they had to settle the idea that the Justice Department was going to come down on them for not being sufficiently pro-Trump.
Right.
And it's just crazy how fast this whole thing has gotten. And you still look at various elected officials and you think, you got to do something about this. You really have to figure out how to just take your role from being somebody whose job it is to facilitate, compromise, and say, I don't think we can compromise with any of this for a while.
Right.
I think we just have to put the brakes on as much as we possibly can and say, no, no, we're opposing absolutely everything you do until we can get either some sane people in here or you stop trying to do some of these things that you're doing.
Right.
That's about it.
Yeah. No, and it's really and it's so asymmetrical, right?
Hmm.
In the sense that like and I think this is what makes the messaging hard for folks who don't pay a lot of attention to politics because they're so used to the right like hyperventilating about Michelle Obama saying children should eat more vegetables in school.
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
God, can you believe this? This is like tyrannical. And and
Yeah.
so they hear that rhetoric from the right, like, oh my God, it's or the Jade Helm, like, holy crap, they're about to do a military takeover, the FEMA camps. And then folks on the left will be like, hey, there's like masked armed military guys checking people's papers in DC,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
actually happening.
Hmm.
It's really, but people just like, well, each
These two
side
things are the same.
explains, right? They
These two
both,
things are the same.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so, and especially if it's not impacting them,
Right.
if you live in rural Oregon or wherever, like your life is still basically the same. Right?
Yeah, not a whole lot has changed for you. If
Right.
you live in, Warrenton or, Seaside or any of these places, life kind of goes on.
Right.
As far as that happens.
Right. And the structure of our media is such that those folks no longer, the way they access news is
Hmm.
through a very kind of partisan kind of channel on social media. So it used
Right.
to be one of the things my research has taught me about, which was a total surprise and is fascinating, is that there was a network of local newspapers across Oregon in the 60s and 70s that were like, they weren't necessarily liberal, but they were just like reality based, right?
Right.
And like that
Right.
was the main source of news for folks in Bend or Redmond or wherever, Pendleton, right?
Right. Right.
Medford, right? Like the Medford Mail Tribune was like just a normie newspaper. And whenever like far right stuff would be happening in Medford, the editor would be like, yeah, these people are kind of crazy. Like
Yeah.
we should cover it in such a way that it's clear that these people have no idea what they're talking about when they talk about
Yeah.
fluoride.
Make sure they're not going to like it, but we should cover it.
Right.
Definitely.
Right. And that was when you got your newspaper in the morning, regardless of your politics, like that's what sort of set the tone
Right.
for the public conversation in those towns. And with the death of these local newspapers, it's just created an opportunity for these like far right fabulistic
Right. Just to swoop
conspiracy.
in and say, hey, here's the new local newspaper that we're going to take a loss on publishing for a couple of years so we can put this in front of you and get you kind of used to using this as a source of truth
Right.
for your daily life.
We're basically being governed by Weekly World News and National Enquirer. I mean, so it's not like that stuff wasn't there. Like that, and the guy that I'm studying published a newspaper in Portland throughout the 60s and 70s called the National Eagle that was just like Newsmax. Like if you read it today, it's like it's indistinguishable from the Daily Wire or whatever. It's the same shit. But the difference is like very few people read it, and it wasn't on newsstands, and it wasn't
Right.
in front of your face. Most people read the Oregonian or the Oregon Journal or whatever these other
Sure.
newspapers.
You used to have to work to find that kind of stuff.
Yes.
You used to really have to go a long ways for it. And I think that was one of the things that got me started researching this harder in 2016 was realizing that ideas that I had once thought were confined to places like Stormfront, the forum,
Hmm.
are now pretty close to the mainstream of the GOP.
Hmm.
And I kind of found myself wondering, how did this happen?
Yeah.
At one point, we knew that if you said these things, you were a Nazi. And now we've got these people who are saying essentially Nazi things that are being, taken seriously and listened to at the high levels of the GOP.
Hmm.
How did we get to that point where that became mainstream? And that's the question I've been kind of trying to figure out is like, where did we go wrong in terms of not handling this stuff as well as we should have? Why did we let it metastasize from here? So,
Yeah. No, for sure, for sure. There's a book called The Klansman's Son by Adrian Black,
okay.
Don
Right,
Black's
right. The
uh,
Don Black's kid
kid.
from
Yeah,
Stormfront.
that's really fascinating, and like their account of um, stumbling upon the language of white genocide
Mhm.
as a way, and talking about white victimhood rather than white pride. Right, that was what would open a door for you. If you started talking
Right.
about white racial pride, people would be like, "What?" But if you
Yeah,
started
that's a little
talking about
weird.
like, "Don't you feel like your kind of people are out to get you
Mhm.
if you're white?" And isn't that unfair? Uh,
Don't you think it's gone a little bit too far and maybe we should go back the other way a little bit?
yeah,
Don't you think that maybe we're doing a little too much to compensate now?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it was very much a self-conscious strategy on the part of these extremists to try to recruit
Right.
normies or sort of relative normies. And but again, if in the 70s and 80s a newspaper would like see that rhetoric and identify it as like neo-Nazi rhetoric that people are using to
Right.
try to recruit, people would be like, "Oh, come on, these are just hicks, toothless hicks who are kind of racist. Like,
Right.
forget."
Right. You could at some point people would see that and they would just be like, "Yeah, no, we know what that is." But we've almost gotten to the point where we can't really say that anymore because people see it and they think, oh well, maybe the white people have been getting it a little rough for the last few years. Maybe this was necessary and this had to happen. And it was, yeah, a little bit terrifying at that point to think that we've gotten to the point where people's critical thinking skills have atrophied to the point where they're ready to listen to that argument
Right.
to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think, what do you see, being the rest of the trajectory to some extent for the way this all plays out, the next 3 years, say, of this administration? Do you have any things you're seeing and thinking, wow, I bet this is how it's going to go? Any predictions?
I mean, the cardinal rule of being a historian is never predict the future. So I'm very loath to do that.
Nope,
I,
nope. Don't put that evil on me. No way.
yeah,
Not doing that.
right. Exactly. Don't put that evil on me. I don't know. So I'm very loath to predict. I mean, what I can say is uh, my spidey senses in 2016 were like, oh man, this is bad. When Trump got
Yeah.
elected, like, oh geez, this is really, really bad. This is a major break. Um, and then when in the run up to the 2024 election, I just could not even bring myself to just imagine, like before 2016, I would be like, God, what if he gets elected? Like, what would happen? What would it look like?
Yeah.
Right. But in 2024, I just could not do it. And now in hindsight, I realize why that is, because my sense is like this is going to be so unbelievably freaking dark that like we can't
Oh yeah.
conceptualize how dark and violent and awful it's going to be. Um, and
Because he's realized what stopped him the first time around, and he's not going to have any of that in
zero,
his administration anymore. I mean, we said the same thing too. It was like they are going to go absolutely mask off, hog wild on this stuff
right?
in a second administration. If you have like a Stephen Miller running immigration policy, I mean, we know. And we had Katie McHugh, who used to be an executive editor at Breitbart, on the show.
Oh wow,
She worked directly for Miller.
yeah,
And one of the things she said about Miller was that every morning that man used to get an email with the names of every Latino person in the United States who showed up in a police blotter anywhere. he would get this letter or this list every single morning, and they would try to find a way to work as much of this into Breitbart as they possibly could. I mean, what kind of person gets a list of everybody with a Latino last name that gets busted in the country? A racist,
Yeah.
a stone racist, somebody who's just,
Right.
I hate Latino people, and I'm going to use this power I have to get rid of as many of them as I can, however that happens.
Yeah. And like I'd read Project 2025. So,
Hmm.
I think that Stephen Miller is probably one of the most important people in the administration. And then probably second after him is Russ Vought.
Yeah.
In the OMB, who is the guy that was the vector that brought Chris Rufo into the Trump orbit in
Yep.
2020. So Russ Vought was the matchmaker,
The catalyst
there.
behind a lot of those people coming on board.
Yeah,
to some extent.
Yeah, and Russ Vought is a true believing Christian nationalist, and so right, and their vision of what America will be is rooted in the long history of the Heritage Foundation, right, which I'm sort of familiar with,
Right.
which is very much a kind of illiberal, exclusionist, theocratic kind of vision for what the United States should be, and funded by this whole coterie of
Right.
billionaires, and so that there is a plan. Right? Project 2025 really was a plan. Trump understood how unpopular that was, which is why he distanced himself
Ran from
from
it. He wouldn't admit that that was what they were going to do. They kept saying, "Oh, this is a liberal fever dream, man. We're not doing any of this stuff."
Right, but
And then the
what
minute they
Trump,
got in,
yeah, right. But what Trump has learned is that he can create his own reality now. Right, like
right.
to some extent, he can create his own reality. He can kind of boss reality into whatever shape he wants it to be. If he says there's an invasion, there's an invasion. If he says climate change isn't happening, climate change isn't happening. If he said,
Trump said it, I believe it. That settles it.
right,
That's how these people are at this point. And I don't know how you break through that in some of their cases. I don't know how. I thought, maybe the Epstein stuff was going to just that much cognitive dissonance slapping you in the face at once. Maybe that wakes you up. And I think for some of the people it did, but they managed to move the story away from that again.
Yeah.
And, here we are.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like the 30 to 35% of folks who are just completely bought in on the MAGA stuff, like, I don't think there's any. I mean, it's worth it if there are people in your life who are in that realm to
Right.
try to like talk to them about it and see if they could like leave it. But I don't think that's worth anyone's effort.
No. And I mean, they're going to have to figure it out to some extent for themselves, like what it is that's going to make them lose faith in all of this.
Right.
There isn't a magic bullet. There isn't a magic argument. And I think we spent a few years thinking, oh, maybe this scandal is going to be the one, maybe this particular thing. And it's like, no,
No.
the man wasn't wrong when he said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and get away with it. That was one of his more prescient statements, I think, because there's a group of people who aren't going to care, no matter what this guy does.
And, when Joe McCarthy, after he was disgraced, roughly 25 to 30% of people polled thought Joe McCarthy had been treated horribly unfairly. And he was a great guy. When Richard Nixon was impeached, about 25 to 30% of people were like, oh man, he was treated so unfairly. That's terrible. Why did they go after good old Richard Nixon? So like, it's not as if there's like a real American people whose the scales will fall from their eyes at some point.
Yeah.
And they will suddenly see, like, expecting that to happen that's just not going to happen. And that's never been the way our political culture functions.
Right. We just have to accept that there is a chunk of people who are going to have to figure it out on their own.
Right.
That this isn't the way to go with any of this.
Right.
And they may not, because, again, if you're talking about McCarthy having this core of support, Nixon having this core of support, Trump having this core of support, maybe these are all some of the same people. Maybe the demographic is not shifted all that much in any of this.
Yeah. I mean, and these are also tended to be people who read alternative media, like right-wing media, who got information from that place. They tended to be people who were more prone to conspiracy theories, right? And especially anti-leftist conspiracy theories. That, oh yes, or anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? This is why the Jews are out to get Joe McCarthy, or this is why the communists are out to get Richard Nixon, or Jim. And so that dynamic, that like, this is our guy who is out there fighting for us and defending us against this nefarious kind of evil,
this evil plot.
It's a
evil
deep
foreign
plot.
plot.
It's a really deep plot. And so, yeah, I don't have any expectation that that will ever dissipate or entirely go away. But what can change potentially, and this is where the problem of media is so huge, is like reaching the folks who aren't in that hardcore. Uh,
Right.
because the MAGA messaging machine is incredibly well funded. It's really sophisticated. It's drawing on hundreds of years of right wing propaganda that clearly these folks like Posobiec have learned from.
Mm-hmm.
And propaganda works. That's why people do it, because it's really effective.
Oh, yeah.
And
It's
Twitter,
interesting that people think they're immune to propaganda, but not a single one of them thinks they're immune to advertising, and it's essentially the same thing.
right, right. And Musk has turned Twitter into a vector of right wing propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And propaganda. Yeah, I think people expect it to look like, the Nuremberg rallies, or like they expect it to look
Mm-hmm.
like their images of what Nazi Germany was. And so they don't expect a propagandistic outlet like Twitter. But look, there are some leftists on Twitter. I don't know what
Oh,
you're
yeah.
talking about.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't propaganda.
See, we let alternative voices in. We give
Right.
people a place to speak.
Why don't
We're
you
not
believe in
like
free speech?
those censorious Nazis in the mainstream media. We give you, a place to air your controversial views about the Holocaust, really.
Exactly.
We should think harder about how all that happened.
Right. Right. So propaganda is always about defining what people are paying attention to more than just defining the content of everything they think.
Right.
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 So this is why the propaganda victory is just saying that there is a crisis, there's an invasion. And once you've gotten people to accept that framing, that there's an invasion,
Yep.
then what flows from that? Well, are you in support of resisting that invasion, or are you pro-invasion?
And this is how they're manufacturing consent right now for a war with Mexico.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but this is very much where they're going at this point. And,
Right.
people are going to go along with that because, hey, it was an invasion. It was an invasion, and we need to save America from these people.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, because we all at some point need to walk away from this for the sake of our own sanity. Everybody who's in this field, has hopefully something that they do to kind of relax and just let it all blow out for a few minutes. What do you suggest? What helps you?
So I'm a fan of both Portland soccer teams, the Timbers
Okay.
and the Thorns.
Okay.
And I am a season ticket holder for both. And I go to the games and sit in the general admission section where people swear and chant and scream. And so that's fun. And a
Just
nice,
absolute go nuts on the other team kind of section.
Right.
I love it. I love
right.
it. The ultra sections.
One of our great chants involves a song in the middle of which we say "fuck Seattle," even if we're not playing Seattle. like it doesn't matter. Like even if we're playing like Louisville, it's still like, by the way, fuck
By the way,
Seattle.
fuck Seattle. We have this very interesting relationship with you guys. It's very kind of like, man, you all are mad, and we're not sure why we made you so mad. What did we do?
It's a younger
so
brother sister kind of thing.
Yeah, it really is like a sibling kind of rivalry in a lot of ways. Like you're the sibling who's smart enough to keep your mouth shut about certain aspects of how wonderful your town is, so maybe the rents didn't go quite as nuts as a result. Whereas like Seattle, there are times I wish people would just shut up and stop talking about it, because man, we got enough people, and I'm sure you understand this kind of sentiment too.
Right.
Just
Right. It's fun. I mean, a lot of it is just in jest,
of course. I don't think anybody up here takes it wrong at this point, but man, the soccer hate, that was something I was shocked about when it started happening.
Yeah.
Really?
No, the Sounders hate is very real. The hate of the Sounders. Actually, the first time I ever sat in the Timbers Army, soon after the team joined the MLS, my son and I, he was like 10 at the time, went up to a match and waited in line to get into. And as we were waiting in line to get in, there was like a family wearing Sounders gear walking.
Oh boy.
And the people in the audience were like, "That's child abuse. How could you do that to your child? You should be arrested." And like this little kid is like, I mean, my kid's like 10 years old, and he's like watching this, and
what
he's
the hell
like,
is going on?
"Damn, all right." And he understood that it was kind of in jest, but also kind of not. But
right. It's the kind of thing that goes pretty hard, and you find yourself thinking like, yeah, okay, I know you're kind of kidding, But you sort of mean it to some extent.
You
You
sort
sort of do.
So I do that. I've been trying to listen to as much new music as possible from folks whose taste I like and trust, and so I'll go out for walks and just
Yeah,
try
just
to.
something to get away from it for a while because, like, this stuff can be so I mean, you research it, you've got an algorithm that's probably going to be feeding you more than your share of this kind of stories, and, unless you just absolutely kinda wanna lose it as a result of this, you find yourself having to let go of it and walk
Right.
away from it. So, it's always nice to hear how other people in the field do that because I'm always kinda looking for better ways to sort of let go of it and not think about it all the time to
Yeah,
some extent.
yeah, and I have to say I'm also really lucky to be have the job that I have where like I interact with college age students on a regular basis, and you know they're like 18 to 22-year olds have always sort of been. They're kind of curious and
Right.
kind of anxious about the future, but also have a lot of energy and just so like that also rather than like thinking about just curdled brains of flocks watching boomers and
Yep.
these millennial right-wing influencers. I get to actually just like interact with like normal college age kids.
Right.
Learn
Right,
things.
definitely.
Yeah,
That must help quite a bit.
yeah, no, and their energy and their kind of curiosity and so on is always makes me it pushes back the darkness a bit if
Nice.
I get to see that. Uh,
So how can people support you and the work that you're doing in this field?
so I moved off Substack recently because of their friendliness with
Oh,
Nazis.
yeah. Yeah, that's on my list. I gotta do that.
Yeah, it took a while. It wasn't easy. It took work, but I figured it out. And so I'm on Ghost now. So if you, it's
Okay, okay. How do you find
Lightlandia.
Ghost? How do you like Ghost as a platform?
It seems fine. Yeah, it seems good. It seems like a pretty
Okay.
equivalent a substitute, and I was able to kind of port over all of my subscribers from Substack. I think Substack is now trying to make it harder for people to do that.
Right,
Um,
because that's the one kind of thing I have sort of a fear of is, like, if we move this thing off Substack, do we keep the mailing list?
yes,
I don't know how much the Substack subscribers itself matters at all to any of this. Do
right.
they stay with us? Do we get those email addresses, and can we put them all back in? How does this work? And I just don't
Yeah,
really know.
Ghost was super easy and helpful.
Okay.
So I found it to be, you know, not as challenging
Okay.
as some of the other alternatives. So yeah, so I'm on there, and all of my backlog of stuff that I've written. So I've been doing this writing stuff since 2023, and I just kind of use it as a place for me to work out some of my ideas and like share some of the like
Right, right.
wackier, shots of stuff that I found in the archive.
Okay. And what's the address
It's
for your newsletter site? I
rightlandia.ghost.io.
like it.
Right.
I
Yeah.
like
So
it.
right.
Rightlandia.
That's going to age as Portlandia becomes something that people don't remember anymore. But
You know what? It'll work. I mean, I think Portlandia is gonna stick around. That the whole concept had a lot of legs if you Yeah, it was, fascinating.
yeah, and I'm on Blue Sky as well.
Seth.Cotlar at
Yeah,
bluesky.social, right.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm,
And
I,
you're not using Twitter anymore at all, pretty much,
I'm
right?
not. I haven't posted
Yeah.
in over a year. And it was a gradual kind of once Blue Sky emerged, I was like, oh man, I hope this works. I hope this kind
Yeah,
of
this is
places
this
out.
is because there were a few alternatives that sort of popped up, but none of them were really all that
Yeah,
people would say, "Oh, yeah, we're all leaving," and then they're all back on Twitter in 3 days.
right. Yeah, so it took a while for something to kind of take off, and Blue Sky is still very small. Like the daily users are maybe
Yeah,
a
nowhere near.
million, a little bit more than a million. So it's like it doesn't have the reach of a place like Twitter, but um, I mean, as
But
soon
it's
as
definitely where everybody is now in a lot of ways. It's where the energy kind of is. People
yeah,
are starting to move stuff over to their local cities and towns are moving, their various announcements they used to do on Twitter over to Blue Sky. They've all got Blue Sky accounts now, various
right,
government agencies,
right.
etc.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I hope it takes off. I really hope And I like the way that
Yeah,
it's
same.
structured, that is kind of billionaire proof, as they describe it.
Yeah, nobody can buy it and come along and do this because it could all just move over. The
Right,
whole Fediverse concept,
right.
which I really
Yeah.
like.
So I'm rooting for it to work. And Twitter, it seemed pretty obvious to me from the start that this is what Elon Musk was going to do with it. The
Oh,
guy.
yeah. Yeah, writing was on the wall from the minute he said he was buying it.
Yeah.
This is just going to turn into a propaganda fire hose, and
Right.
better get anything you want to get out of here pretty fast, because it's not going to be usable in
Yeah.
anywhere between now and 6 months.
And for me, one of the real tipping points came when I did a thread on Gerald L.K. Smith, who was this Christian nationalist guy, founded the America First Party in 1943, who was America's leading anti-Semite from the 40s into the 70s, which is a real claim to fame.
Mhm.
And I did a thread on Gerald L.K. Smith, whose platform looks pretty much like the contemporary platform of the Claremont kind of new right. And I was like, that's kind of bad, right?
Yeah,
You
real
just
bad.
take out the word Jews, right? If you just take out the most explicit anti-Semitic stuff, the structure of it is pretty much the same. Anyway, so I did this thread about him, and it started kind of doing numbers or whatever. And I was like, well, that's
Right.
interesting.
Caught on a little
A-
bit, went viral a little bit.
And then I discovered that a lot of the people who were sharing it, or some of the people who were sharing it, were people who thought Gerald O.K. Smith was cool. So they were sharing it in order to say, oh man, look at this guy. This is kind of interesting, this Gerald L.K. Smith stuff. I didn't know
Right.
about this. And I was like, okay, I did not post this because I wanted to enable
Yeah.
contemporary fascists to create a useful genealogy for themselves.
This is not a
That was
stand thread.
not my purpose.
No, we are not standing him. We are burying him.
We are burying him. I came to bury him. You people are coming to resuscitate him. And
Yeah.
I realized that I could not control it, right? I
Nope.
didn't have control over what people were going to do with it, and I absolutely did not want it to be used for that purpose. And so I closed down. I
Yeah.
blocked my account. Nope. Blocked all the people who had shared it in that spirit. And then I had to think okay, I mean, this is what I write about. This is what I'm interested in, but I absolutely do not want to be doing a service for these folks.
Right.
But there
And
was
we've
no
run
way
into
to
that
do
same
that.
problem here. Like, there are certain things I don't want to cover because I don't know how to cover them in a way that's really going to hurt them.
Right.
I don't know how to cover them in a way that's going to make them listen to it and grind their teeth, because they didn't want that kind of coverage.
Right.
And until I can figure that out, I don't really want to go too far into some of it.
Right.
It's just, no, sorry. You would appreciate the publicity,
Yeah.
any publicity, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to give you that until I can figure out how to do it in a way that you're just going to hate.
Right. I mean, because in part I was doing it to try to inoculate people who didn't know
Right.
about this history, to sort of inoculate them against a contemporary reemergence of some of this stuff, because we know the history, we can be more aware. But instead of serving as inoculation, it was serving as amplification.
Yeah. Am I becoming a recruitment vector for these people?
Exactly. It was
And I
becoming
don't want to do
recruitment.
that.
Yeah. And
Last thing I want to do.
right. And I realized it was my own kind of naivete about who was the audience that was out there, right?
Right.
And so because of that, because Twitter became such a Nazi-friendly site, thanks to Elon Musk letting all these Nazis back on,
Right.
it basically became a site where once people like that would be marginalized, deprioritized in the algorithm, et cetera. Now those folks are boosted in the algorithm.
Yeah, they are the valued users here, because they drive eyeballs and they drive clicks, and they're probably not too far off of what Elon himself thinks on some of these issues. So yeah, go ahead, push this.
Right. So
And
there was no way to do what I do on Twitter without just helping, right?
Right.
Recruit more folks for this kind of far right.
Well, kudos to you for realizing that and walking away, because I think a lot of people don't quite understand that in some cases, beating some of these dead horses with people just makes it worse.
Mhm.
They see these people being referenced, and if you didn't know who these guys were, then you're going to go look and you're going to think, maybe that's not so bad.
Right.
It's like the way the mass shooters have historically liked to misspell names of their inspirations in their manifesto.
Right.
So you'll dunk on them saying, "Ha ha, he spelled Kaczynski wrong." It's like, no, he wants you to go look up Kaczynski.
Right.
He wants you to go look up Anders Breivik. That's why he said it that way.
Right.
So you'll Google it and hopefully come up with the conclusion this person wants you to come up with.
Right.
So,
yeah. And to me, I mean, when I do what I do, what I hope my ideal sort of audience are people who maybe are in community with or work alongside folks who are susceptible to this messaging. And who maybe if they are more familiar with this history, know more about it, they can then deploy it in conversations with people who they have a relationship of trust with to some extent, family member, coworker, neighbor, etc. So that, just to be able to drop into that kind of, but wait a minute, what about this or what about that? And so hopefully arming people with this historical information enables them to kind of play their, we all have a role to play where we are. And, we can only do what we can do. Sorry, I have to move because my computer's about to die. And so, that's what I've got. That's what I've got to bring to it is a whole bunch of really arcane information.
Right. But, this is arcane information that can definitely help with giving people a perceptive look at where we are right now.
Right.
In terms of how did we get here? What was the path that led us to this point? And how can we potentially stop taking this path? How can we get out of here and potentially do something healthier and less hateful with our time?
Yeah.
Seth, thank you so much for coming on with me today. I really, really appreciate your time. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for a while and definitely somebody I wanted to talk to about this kind of stuff. And I'm really glad that I was able to get you on. Find a time to do that.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. Thanks for what you do.
Hey, well, thank you very much. And you have a great rest of your day, okay?
Thank you. Yeah, you too.